that.
Always. Yeah, I reiterate that.
Well, thank you. And as a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve, I certainly agree with that and agree with your answers and your commitment to the men and women in uniform. Secretary Hegseth, your approach to leadership, I believe, stands in direct conflict with the ideas that we just discussed with General Kane. And at a time of great chaos and uncertainty in the world, I'm extremely concerned that your many shortcomings could have potentially life-threatening consequences for American service members. In your confirmation hearing, I expressed my deep reservations about your qualifications to run the DoD. I also made it clear that no board of directors in the world would hire someone with so little experience.
The question was not shouted and it was not theatrical, but it landed with force. Senator Gary Peters looked directly at Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and asked something many service members are quietly wondering. What does accountability actually look like when it applies to the person in charge? If you value reporting that explains the stakes behind moments like this, take a second to subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.
Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Kane, both before and during your confirmation hearing, we discussed your commitment to duty and to adhering to the Constitution as well as your oath of office. And I certainly appreciated your reassurance that you will remain, quote, a nonpartisan leader through and through, unquote, with one of your top priorities being maintaining the independence of the U.S. military. Along with remaining apolitical, I'm sure you will agree that fostering a stable, mission-focused environment is essential to leading the Department of Defense. So my question for you, sir, is can you please share with this committee and the American people what your approach to leadership as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is?
Yes, sir. It's certainly the job is one to understand the global set of challenges, integrate the options that must be considered, and then to present those options to the president. And I've always taken a servant leadership approach throughout my career based on my oath of office and the Constitution and my commission.
And as a nonpartisan leader, you reiterate that?
Always. Yeah, I reiterate that.
Well, thank you. And as a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve, I certainly agree with that and agree with your answers and your commitment to the men and women in uniform. Secretary Hegseth, your approach to leadership, I believe, stands in direct conflict with the ideas that we just discussed with General Kane. And at a time of great chaos and uncertainty in the world, I'm extremely concerned that your many shortcomings could have potentially life-threatening consequences for American service members. In your confirmation hearing, I expressed my deep reservations about your qualifications to run the DoD. I also made it clear that no board of directors in the world would hire someone with so little experience to run a large business, much less the Department of Defense, where American lives are on the line regularly. For this reason, in addition to some concerns we had about character, I ultimately opposed your nomination. And unfortunately, my reservations have become reality. I know my colleagues have touched on some of these issues, but to briefly summarize, you have failed to set the example, or lead from the front, as you like to say. And this includes prompting a leadership and oversight vacuum at the department by firing qualified uniformed leaders without cause, creating loyalty tests and leak investigations that have led to 5 of your senior advisors resigning or being fired, sharing classified military details on an unsecure app during operations in Yemen that included unauthorized individuals on at least 2 separate occasions, and revoking the DoD personal protection detail for both Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and the former chairman of Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, putting their safety at risk while they are still under threat from Iran. We have seen time and time again how your conduct, lack of personal responsibility, are harming readiness, reputation, and professionalism of our military. At a time where Israel and Iran are in open conflict and our adversaries in Russia and China will exploit any weaknesses, unfortunately, my worst fears about your leadership shortfalls, unfortunately, have been realized. Secretary Hegseth, I firmly believe that accountability from leadership is vital in all sectors, not just in the military. And demonstrating to your subordinates that everyone plays by the same rules helps to build trust and open communications within your team. And those two things are extremely important. And I know that you share my desire to ensure that we're holding our senior leaders accountable for actions. And during your nomination hearing, you stated, quote, accountability is coming because everybody in this room knows if you are a rifleman and you lose your rifle, they are throwing the book at you, end of quote. You also said that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability, and I couldn't agree more on how important accountability is. As we all know, at the request of this committee, the Department of Defense Inspector General launched an investigation into your use of Signal, an unclassified commercially available messaging application to discuss information pertaining military actions in Yemen. So given your focus on accountability, how will you demonstrate this accountability to the men and women in the U.S. military if the Inspector General finds that you improperly disclosed information?
That assessment is pending at this time.
That is a hypothetical question, but the gentleman's time has expired.
I think your answer is clear. You are not going to be held accountable.
Thank you very much, Senator Peters.
Peters began by contrasting two very different leadership philosophies. He first addressed General Kane, praising his repeated commitment to constitutional duty, nonpartisan leadership, and the long-held principle that the United States military must remain apolitical. Peters, himself a former Navy Reserve officer, emphasized how critical stability, professionalism, and trust are inside the Department of Defense, especially at a time of global uncertainty. Then the tone shifted. Turning to Secretary Hegseth, Peters made clear that he believes Hegseth's leadership style runs directly counter to those principles. He reminded the room that during Hegseth's confirmation hearing, he had raised serious concerns about qualifications, experience, and judgment. Peters said plainly that no responsible board of directors would place someone with such limited leadership experience in charge of an organization as large and consequential as the Department of Defense, where lives are routinely on the line. Those concerns, Peters argued, are no longer theoretical. He laid out a detailed list of actions that he says have created instability and weakened trust inside the Pentagon. That included the firing of senior uniformed leaders without clear cause, internal loyalty tests and leak investigations that resulted in multiple senior advisors resigning or being dismissed, and the sharing of sensitive military information on the unsecured messaging app Signal during active operations in Yemen, allegedly including unauthorized individuals in those conversations. Peters also highlighted the decision to revoke personal security protections for former Defense Secretary Mark Esper and former chairman of the Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, despite ongoing threats from Iran. In Peters' view, these choices put individuals at risk and sent a troubling message about how institutional norms are treated under current leadership. All of this, he said, comes at a moment when global tensions are already dangerously high, with Israel and Iran in open conflict and adversaries like Russia and China actively looking for signs of weakness. Leadership failures at the top, Peters warned, do not stay contained in Washington. They ripple through readiness, morale, and credibility across the force. That brought Peters to accountability. He reminded Hegseth of his own words during the confirmation process, when Hegseth said accountability was coming and compared leadership responsibility to the way a rifleman would be punished for losing their weapon. Peters said he agreed with that principle, that accountability must apply at every level, especially the highest ones, if trust is going to exist inside the ranks. Then came the core question. At the request of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Department of Defense Inspector General has launched an investigation into Hegseth's use of Signal to discuss military operations in Yemen. Peters asked directly how Hegseth would demonstrate accountability to service members if the Inspector General finds that he improperly disclosed information. Hegseth did not offer a plan, a commitment, or a standard. He called it a hypothetical and said the assessment was still pending. The gavel fell. Time expired. Peters closed with a blunt conclusion that resonated beyond the hearing room, that the answer itself spoke volumes. In his view, the refusal to engage the question suggested that accountability, at least at the top, may be optional. This exchange was not just about one app or one investigation. It was about whether the same rules apply to leaders as to the people they command. For a military built on discipline and trust, that question may matter more than any single policy dispute. If you want continued coverage that goes deeper than sound bites and explains how leadership decisions affect the people who serve, make sure you subscribe so you stay informed.